Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, how women in Ecuador who miscarry are routinely treated as criminal suspects by doctors due to the country's strict abortion laws. Also, as our lives become increasingly affected by climate change, what does it mean when there's only a few women at the table during climate negotiations? That's a question I'll be asking Bianca Pitt from She Changes Climate about next month's COP27 summit. And an investigation finds systemic abuse and misconduct within women's professional soccer in the US. But first, Ecuador has one of the toughest abortion laws in the world. Women can face legal prosecution as soon as a pregnancy is terminated, should it be a miscarriage or an abortion. Doctors regularly reporting women to the police in this very conservative Catholic nation. This extract from our Reporters program illustrates the challenges women face.
Machachi, a working-class rural town to the south of Quito. One of its residents, Clara, barely leaves the house anymore. Shaken by what she's been through and fearful of being recognised, she only allows us to film part of her face and reveal no details that would allow anyone to identify her address. At 16 years old, she's being prosecuted for having an abortion. Her lawyer, Ana Vera, has come to see the family to prepare for the hearing.
My daughter was having stomach pains, so I said to her that we had to go to the hospital because I didn't know what else to do for her. So when we arrived at the hospital, they told me that it was an abortion, a deliberate abortion. But I thought to myself, that's just not possible. So then a policeman who was there came over and asked the doctor, "Doctor, what's going on with that young girl?" And the doctor told him that it was an abortion. So the police officer said the girl will be taken away and held by the police.
I felt very uncomfortable with those policemen near me. And when they said that I was going to be arrested, at that point I felt it was like fear.
I got down on my knees and I asked the police officers not to send my daughter to jail.
I'm scared that the legal proceedings are going to be very complicated, that there will be other things that come up, and in the end, they'll take away my freedom.
I think we can win this case. The good thing being that in the end, you'll be declared innocent.
Anna's worked out a defence strategy for Clara. Regardless of whether she took misoprostol, a medicine for stomach pains, which is often used to provoke an abortion, her lawyer will argue that this was a phantom pregnancy. Despite fertilisation, no embryo formed in her uterus. It isn't uncommon, yet her mother's not confident about the outcome.
As the mother, the pain hasn't left me. It's not easy to forget everything I've been through with my daughter. The most awful part was in that hospital.
The only thing that I'd like to ask her is that she forgives me for what I did.
Do you feel guilty?
Yes.
French author Annette Young has won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Literature. Young, whose work is mostly autobiographical, is 82. The French novelist, growing up in Normandy to working-class parents, one of her books entitled Happening in English outlines her experience of having an illegal abortion at the age of 23 during the early 1960s. Now, more than ever, all of us are confronting the realities of the climate crisis. In recent months, we've witnessed a series of climatic disasters, be it record-breaking heat waves here in Europe, extraordinary flooding in Pakistan, or super-strength hurricanes in the US. The Egyptian city of Cairo next month will play host to COP27, the UN Climate Summit. But what about female representation when it comes to those climate talks? Last year, only 34% of COP26 committees and 39% of those leading delegations were indeed women. Yet it's women who continue to bear the brunt of climate change. Let's cross now to London to speak to Bianca Pitt, a co-founder of She Changes Climate. Thanks for your time, Bianca. Let me start with the location of COP27, Egypt. Not exactly a country best known for women's rights, is it?
Egypt was chosen as a host country because it was the turn of an African country to host COP. This is a so-called African COP. And Egypt in itself has, I'd say it's fair to say, had some issues with human rights, but it is by no means the only country to have that. I think that looking at the Egyptian government, there is representation of women. We have female ministers, and they are rightly proud of the strong voices in government. And we know that 3 of those women are also working behind the scenes to make this COP a success. However, unfortunately, the women in themselves, and I have to say the environment minister, for example, is one of them, and we would have very much liked to see her be the president of this year's COP, weren't chosen as presidents or lead negotiators. So we will hope that they will really pull their weight behind the scenes very much to deliver the results that we need to see in this day and age.
Bianca, research consistently shows that while climate change affects all of us, it doesn't affect everybody equally. Why is it that women are impacted even more so?
So women are, due to their socioeconomic status, simply the ones to be hit by the impact of natural disasters first and foremost. 75% of people living in poverty are women. When it comes to natural disasters, they are the first who have to flee. They also care for the young and the old. So if we saw that, for example, in hurricanes and tsunamis, they were 3 times as likely to lose their lives than men, simply because they hadn't been taught how to swim and they were trying to rescue their relatives from the environmental catastrophe that was setting in. We think that and a lot is made about women as victims of the climate crisis. We very much want to point to the fact that women actually bring the solutions. They're actually the key to climate action. If we look at studies, we find that countries that have more female parliamentarians have better climate policy and policy implementation. The same is true for businesses. Those with women on boards have better climate policy and policy implementation. So it makes sense to bring them in to see the results and to obviously have their vision and perspective represented in these talks.
I know this is a gloomy question to ask you, Bianca, because I sense you're an optimist, but is it too little too late in any case?
The window of opportunity is closing, and scientists are telling us that we only have 2 to 3 years to avert climate chaos by 2030. This is a huge challenge, and at the same time, we have a huge opportunity.
So what needs to be done to boost the number of women?
So we are calling for the COPs going forward and starting with the COP next year, 2028, in UAE, for them to have co-presidents, a man and a woman, running the conference. We also want the delegations to be run by a man and a woman in tandem. And if we start with that, we think we will be able to change the outcomes of these conferences.
Are your requests being heard, Bianca?
We have just submitted a letter to the UNFCCC, the UN, and the COP presidency, which was signed by nearly 1,000 leaders from business, government, civil society, and the cultural sector. And we are absolutely certain that it is going to be heard. The demands in there are going to be heard. We're also hosting an Ambition Leader Summit on the 4th of November to make sure that the voices are heard and their vision for 2030 and the action that they're already taking is broadcast loud and clearly to the world leaders and delegates gathering in Egypt.
Bianca Pitt, it's been good speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette.
Now, an explosive report has found that sexual misconduct and emotional abuse are systemic in women's soccer in the US. The year-long inquiry revealing it had impacted multiple teams and coaches, with some of the sport's most high-profile stars themselves being victims. Selena Sykes has more.
A damning report for the top flight of the women's game in the US. Sexually charged comments, unwanted sexual advances, touching and coercive sexual intercourse. Behaviour that has become systemic in the National Women's Soccer League. The findings of a year-long investigation are hard to digest for many in the sport, including the president of the US Soccer Federation.
Many of the players in this report, I know, many of them I coached. I just found it really maddening that players had to go through this.
The report focuses on 3 coaches accused of sexual misconduct and emotional abuse. In each case, the club's owners and executives were aware and did nothing. A failure to put basic safeguards in place for players that allowed a vicious cycle of abuse to grow, says the national team captain.
We're angry that it took over 200 people sharing their trauma to get to this point right now. I think for so long, this has always fallen on the player to demand change. And that is because the people in authority and decision-making positions have repeatedly failed to protect us.
Calls for change from influential players that are putting pressure on those in the highest positions in the game. Women's soccer is very popular in the US. According to FIFA, a third of female players in the world are American. And the findings of this report are likely to have reverberations elsewhere. The 4-time world champions are seen as trailblazers for the women's game, not just for their skills on the pitch, but also for their fight for equal rights, with the national team's equal pay settlement earlier this year inspiring women's teams across the world.
And that's it for now. You can keep up with the 51% on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. We're going to leave you with images of a growing number of women around the world cutting their hair to show solidarity with anti-government protests in Iran. Those demonstrations following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini while in custody. She'd been detained for failing to wear her veil properly. So until our next show, bye for now.